Today we're having a big rally. We've got a lot of supporters who feel like they want to do something to show that they support our stand and that we don't stand alone. We're fighting for freedom for this country and for use of our public lands. These people are coming from all over, far and wide, mostly from our neighbors from around here, from Utah, because they're fighting the same thing we're fighting, and they're all here to just say, we've had enough. We've had enough. We're going to take our land back. We're done. It's more about control of the federal government. They want control of our land out there so they can make it into a wilderness area and they can lock us out.
We don't claim ownership to the land, but we do claim ownership to the feed, the forage that grows upon it. And we make beneficial use of that forage. In other words, we feed it to a cow, she grazes it out on the hills, and she turns it into red meat that ends up on your table. Right now, it looks like the movie Red Dawn. We've got 200-something plus federal agents up there in a compound, a military compound that they have put together. And it is, they've got snipers and military, everybody's armed.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Is the best government really the one that governs the least? Can we ever have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution? If the Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs, why is the government all over it? Tonight, whatever happened to freedom? Understanding where we go from here should start with understanding how we got here.
I'm Bruce Ray Riggs, and I'm going to point out a couple of things how this country's been deceived, and it's pretty hard to find this anywhere online. Even our attorneys aren't schooled this in their education system. It wasn't even really known until 1967, and they never changed the way the system was taught once they found out. In 1866, the United States government, the government, asked for a different form of government. Because of the Confederate rebellious states, they was afraid they was going to succeed again in the future. 1868, Black's Law Dictionary even makes clear the 14th Amendment created, or at least recognized for the first time, a citizen of the United States as distinct to that of the state. 1870, the District of Columbia declared itself a corporation of the District of Columbia, doing business as the United States and successors of all corporations in the United States. And the 14th Amendment, creating us as corporations, underneath this, gave them full jurisdiction over us as corporations, not as human beings. In other words, the District of Columbia declared itself doing business as the United States. Before that, you were a citizen of the state, according to the Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1. This amendment that was never legally ratified, Congressional Record, June 13, 1967, 99 years later, proved it to be never ratified for many reasons. It was done at gunpoint. It was never presented to President Andrew Johnson to sign or veto on the law. Only had one vote win. I mean, just numerous reasons. All these documents on this website, you can basically view as we go. It's supposed to be, it was viewed and deemed a political choice. If the American people ever rebelled against this amendment, the Constitution must strike it with nullity. Even if they went on to say this amendment was properly ratified, the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution would still strike it with nullity because it supersedes the Constitution by creating a different citizenship and a different form of government than what the Founding Fathers' intent. As you can see, every form of government that's in our country right now that's above and beyond the basic, was the 16 functions of the federal government, is from the jurisdiction of this amendment. In 1913, when 51% of the people was supposed to be considered to be a part of this private citizenship, this private corporate amendment, remember a corporation is a person within the 14th Amendment, then that moved 100% of us into this, and therefore there's where the Federal Reserve Act came into play. Start printing private currency for a public trust. And by the way, the 14th Amendment makes a citizen of the United States responsible for the national debt 77 years before the national debt even began. It created the citizenship 3 years before this corporation was even set up to govern the citizenship and the jurisdictions thereof. Powers not delegated to Congress or states retained by the people. Ask yourself, where was our government ever given jurisdiction over our privately owned firearms? You can't see where in the Constitution they were. But the municipal corporation of the District of Columbia, the head of all corporations in the United States, you being a corporation, can put a corporation over you, the municipal corporation of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the municipal corporation of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, municipal corporation of whatever, the Federal Reserve Bank. They can make statutes, which are municipal corporate ordinances or policies, and that's how they're enforced, the statutes. And because you're under that jurisdiction, you have to go by them. Can a larger corporation tell a smaller corporation that's under it what to do? Sure they can. Can the main office make a policy, for instance, telling their employees they must have their shirt tucked in while they're working? Sure they can. Statute was basically a policy, a municipal corporate ordinance. They're taking jurisdiction through the citizenship of an amendment that was never ratified. If you don't like your gun control, well, guess what? It all comes from the jurisdiction of an amendment that was never ratified. Congressional Record, June 13, 1967, page 15641 to 15646, memorialized on the Senate floor. All these documents are on this website. Like I said, we're proving everything as we go. I mean, there's so many ways we've been deceived through the years. For instance, in 1931, our government declared a state of emergency. They declared bankruptcy through the Emergency War Powers Act. We've been in a state of emergency since 1931. The Constitution has basically been suspended since then. And, I mean, they just don't tell us. We live under the color of law, thinking we've had all these rights, but slowly they're fading away and we don't understand how. Well, guess what? They haven't really existed since 1931.
Dozens of armed federal officers are preparing for a showdown with a Nevada cattle rancher regarded by some as an outlaw, a hero by others.
Rangers and agents from several federal agencies have surrounded a 600,000-acre section of public land and are preparing to move against rancher Cliven Bundy, whose cattle have been grazing illegally, they say, for the past 20 years. George Knapp, the I-Team, visited the Bundy ranch this week and has that story.
So this is the freedom that we have in America right here. We're going to have our freedom inside of that fence.
Bunkerville rancher Cliven Bundy thinks the federal government has gone too far in preparing to round up his cattle. Example, this is one of 2 designated spots where the public will be allowed to protest the roundup. A sign inside the fence shows how some people feel about a First Amendment zone. And during our tour with Bundy, a passerby stopped to offer encouragement.
I'm one of your neighbors. I get to look at that every day in my life. Hang in there.
Okay, thank you.
Miles away, just off the interstate, another fenced area is where media are allowed. Armed agents in trucks form a wall to prevent anyone from approaching what resembles a military staging area, the heart of the Bundy Roundup operation. More rangers sit at every road leading into the 600,000-acre Gold Butte area to prevent the general public from coming in.
With all of these rangers and all this force that's out here, they're only after one man right now. Who do you think they're after? They're after Cliven Bundy. Whether they want to incarcerate me or whether they want me to shoot me in the back, they're after me. But that's not all that's at stake here. Your liberty and freedoms are at stake.
Bundy's had a long time to sharpen his message. The fight has been building since 1993, when BLM changed grazing rules for Gold Butte to protect the endangered desert tortoise. Bundy refused to go along and stopped paying his fees altogether. Since then, the BLM and federal courts have ordered him to stop letting his cattle roam through Gold Butte, and he's ignored the orders because he doesn't recognize federal authority over the land.
My forefathers have been up and down the Virgin Valley here ever since 1877. All of these rights that I claim have been created through preemptive rights and beneficial use of the forage and the water. I have been here longer, and my rights are all older than BLM even existed.
The Bundy family was already ranching here long before the Department of Interior was born and long before tortoises were protected. But federal courts say he doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. BLM has long sidestepped the fight, in part because of concerns what might happen if it tried to round up his 500 or so cattle that even now are grazing on forbidden public lands. Bundy says he's always been willing to pay fees, but not if it helps to cut his own throat.
I don't have no problem with that. I've tried to pay it to Nevada State, Clark County, and they've got some of my money in their coffers right now from it. But I'm not going to pay my money for the wrong landlord, and I'm not going to pay my money to BLM to manage me out of business. The federal government has seized Nevada's sovereignty, Nevada statehood. They've seized Nevada laws, and they've seized our public land. We have no access to our public land.
Critics say Bundy's being arrogant and that his cattle have caused irreparable harm to Gold Butte's fragile environment. Environmentalists forced BLM's hand by threatening to sue in federal court. The Bureau will pay nearly $1 million to a private contractor to round up Bundy's cows. But with dozens of government agents positioned all around the area for what might take weeks or months, the true cost could be much higher. Bundy's cowhands have time to kill these days because they're prohibited from heading out to work their cattle. And soon enough, there could be no cattle left. The BLM plans to sell off Bundy's herd. Bundy stopped short of saying how far he's willing to take it.
Well, I've fought this thing legally. I've fought it politically. I've fought it through the media. And I will fight it on the ground if I have to.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
We are the free and independent people of the United States of America. We are free because those who preceded us fought a war against a person who was then the world's grandest king and who presided over what was then the world's grandest empire. The Founding Fathers risked, as they like to tell us, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors for the freedom and independence they won and we have inherited. But they were not saints. And initially, their cause was not popular. From the records available today, the people who measure historical trends have concluded that in 1776, only about 1/3 of Americans supported the revolution. About 1/3 of Americans opposed it. And about 1/3 of them didn't care. When I first looked at these numbers, I thought, in 1776, this was the grandest fight for the greatest amount of freedom for the most people at any point in. And because Americans came to believe, even the 1/3 that were afraid and the 1/3 that didn't care, that these rights are ours by virtue of our humanity. Whether you believe that we are the highest order of natural selection, or whether you believe, as I do, that we were created by God in His image and likeness, you know in your heart that these natural yearnings, as St. Thomas Aquinas and Thomas Jefferson called them, are our natural rights, are a part of our humanity, and cannot long be denied us. And yet, they have been denied. The same Founding Fathers who wrote that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech in fact enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, which punished speech that was critical of them, critical of the government. This happened because people were afraid to challenge the tyranny of the majority. America, the greatest losses to our freedom have come not from someone attacking us, but from the government ignoring the Constitution and the majority letting them get away with it. The worst amendments to the Constitution were not those ratified by the states, but rather were amendments by consensus, where all 3 branches of government agreed to look the other way. When good people do nothing, bad things happen. So what shall we do? We should challenge authority, no matter who is in charge. We should challenge the majority whenever it curtails anybody's freedom. We should side with freedom no matter what the government says. We should vote out of office those who push the government outside the Constitution, no matter what earmarks they just brought home. And we should make the government afraid of us. Afraid of us. Because as Jefferson reminded us, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there is liberty.
2 years prior to the ratification, or the alleged ratification of the 14th Amendment, Congress changed the definitions of person and citizens to also include the term corporation, where I identify the fact that everyone is very correct in pointing out the Act of 1871 because it was a step in this process. But what concerns me is that I often hear when anyone tries to bring up the 14th Amendment, first, and I want to get this out of the way, is the matter of slavery. All men and women were created equal in the eyes of the Creator, or bestowed upon us by our human rights, however you want to see it. All men and women. And now that we've gotten to this day and age where we all know that, and we can get past that, this isn't a racial issue. All right, that being said, in 1868, 11 states delegates were forced out of the ratification process of the 14th Amendment, and they used the force of the Union Army to do so. Now, a lot of people argue with me about that, but some of these men went back to their respective states and declared so. At resurrectrepublic.com, we have all of these documents on our website that you guys can come and see and see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I don't want anyone to take my word for it. But my state included, for those that would say that it was all about the South, my state of New Jersey also went to the House floor and declared the 14th Amendment unconstitutional. This was brought up in Georgia, in the Georgia Memorial to Congress. Judge Leander H. Perez from Louisiana, Supreme Court Justice, who declared that the only way that this would ever change is public awareness to be raised on a level that the people were willing and able to do something about it. And I see something happening in this country now. I finally see the spark that I have been for very many years looking for, and the awareness is starting to peak. The unfortunate part about it is we have individuals who will come up right from within and fracture these movements and try and spread disinformation. Of course, that's the way of the enemy to fight against truth. But the fact of the matter is that since the Civil War, we have been at a soft form of martial law. The 14th Amendment states that we are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And for those of you who think that it's about slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation expired. That's why you had Jim Crow. That's why Martin Luther King had to march. The 14th Amendment set no one free. It enslaved the entire nation with debt enslavement. And I'll close on my 14th by saying, go to Section 4. I urge anyone to go to Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. Now, once you just gloss over, the common person would say, well, this binds the southern states to pay for the debt, and it doesn't allow them to question its validity. But if you understand the law, and you take out between two commas the fact that the South has been as included, what it doesn't negate is the fact that it's enslaving all citizens. They cannot question the validity of the public debt, and we put the politicians in control of the public debt, which basically means we can't question their validity. It's changed our entire form of government, constitutional to corporate. Without identifying that 14th Amendment, any attack on the Act of 1871 or the Marshall system would be futile.
Right. And what was it that brought you to this understanding? I mean, you come from a background where your father was a judge and a Knight of Columbus Mason, which most people won't even know what that means or what that refers to. So give us a little sense of how you ultimately came to your understanding of how this system works.
Well, I did not attend law school, and I don't want anyone to think that I did, but what I did attend was the school of my father. I grew up at his feet in his law library, and I spent a lot of my childhood growing up and watching him, and I would sit very quietly in the corner. It's kind of funny. It's almost like The Godfather, when the kids would play at the feet of well, it's the same thing. He had this huge law library, and he was on the phone mostly dealing with cases and having police come and get warrants signed and such, but I learned a lot from him, and at a certain point in his life, he came to some realizations that led me on a pursuit of research. I linked up with Mr. Bruce Ray Riggs. Bruce Ray Riggs is my co-host, and he is, without him, he's my right arm. He's been a mentor to me, and he's an amazing individual. His stepfather was a prosecutor in Los Angeles. So he really makes up the other end of the research, and Dirty Uncle Sam is where we have all of our documents hosted. You can get to it through resurrectedrepublic.com, but you can go on the main page of our website. You'll see a video that I made to get the information out, and we attach the body of our research to that video, and that's the one at the top of the page in our main site. All of the evidence to support everything that we say is all backed up on the website, and we have original documents, which also ties in, Sean, to the 13th Amendment, the original 13th Amendment disappearing. That also is part of this usurpation. See, this was planned out almost from the inception. When Benjamin Franklin walked out, he said that he gave us a republic if we could keep it. Well, almost immediately from its creation, it was planned for to be under attack by the British Crown. In fact, I don't believe we won. I think that, you know, the evidence shows that the king funded both sides of the war. Why did he do that? Well, when you understand that we had several presidents before George Washington under the Articles of Confederation, and you understand that we did not have a strong federal government, that's what these gentlemen were seeking. They were seeking a way to give themselves enough power to do what they needed to do, and there were certain ones among them that tried to restrain government. Certainly that was what the Bill of Rights was for. Some people say that it's failed. I say it's not. As a matter of fact, it's lived on in the hearts of the people stronger than any other thing that I mean, you look to these other countries, and when you look to a patriotic American who loves their Constitution, they love the concept and the idea. The problem is, and the challenge is that we need to instruct them as to what the true, real, organic Constitution was about.
Right.
Because they're following the Constitution. This is why Obama and Feinstein and all of them, and it's not just the left, it's the left and the right equally, to the Patriot Act under Bush. It's why they get away with this.
Well,
why
again,
they get away with these crimes.
It's an enlargement of federal powers, and this ultimately with his corporate powers. And you mentioned the Bill of Rights, and it's like therein is this paradox between the 14th Amendment saying that we're citizens of the United States, but the Bill of Rights was actually supposed to protect the fact that the United States was incorporated by the separate states themselves, and so all the rights that the federal government that were not allocated to the federal government were supposed to be reserved to the states and to the people who actually embody those states.
Let's look at what is the claim being made here. There are a few factors to take note of when we look at the ratification of the 14th Amendment. First, we have the fact that the amendment was proposed in Congress, and 2/3 of the people present voted to approve the amendment, and then it gets passed. It gets sent out to the states, and then 3/4 of the states have to ratify the amendment for it to take effect. Well, one thing we can note about the passage of the 14th Amendment is that it was not, shall we say, entirely without blemish. At the time that the amendment was set to be voted on and discussed, John P. Stockton was a newly elected senator from New Jersey, and he was known to be an opponent of the 14th Amendment. And he took his seat, duly took his seat in the U.S. Senate at the beginning of the 39th Congress. Well, informal canvassing of senators made quite clear that there was no 2/3 majority in favor of the amendment at that time. In fact, it turned out that the amendment would have been one vote short of passage. So, a motion was introduced not to seat John Stockton. But he's already been seated. This is the problem. He's already been seated. So you can't really vote not to seat somebody who has been seated. If he's been seated, and you want to get rid of him for one reason or another, you have to vote to expel him. But expulsion requires a 2/3 vote. They didn't have a 2/3 vote to expel him. So they voted not to seat somebody who had already been seated. Okay? I mean, it's sort of like, you know, how can something be both A and not A at the same time and in the same manner? So they voted not to seat this man who had already been seated. And then they went ahead and voted to approve the 14th Amendment. Now that's, you know, it's really not legal. It's right, not a proper procedure. But that's actually the least of the problems associated with the amendment. Then it goes out to the states. Now Tennessee ratifies the amendment. But here's how Tennessee ratified the amendment. The problem that was occurring in Tennessee was that opponents of the amendment were refusing to show up at the State House and thereby preventing a quorum. Okay, I mean, you have to have a certain minimum number of people present in order to conduct business. Well, opponents of the amendment thought one way to prevent its ratification is just not to show up, and then they wouldn't have a quorum. Well, in order to get a quorum, 2 of the anti-amendment Tennessee legislators were actually kidnapped and forcibly brought to the State House and declared to be present so that the vote could take place. 2 of the anti-amendment Tennessee legislators were actually kidnapped and forcibly brought to the State House and declared to be present so that the vote could take place. Now there are some sticklers, you know, who think that kidnapping is immoral, you know, who would throw, you know, some doubt on this, the legality of this. And the thing is that when the House Speaker called the roll, well, these 2 representatives refused to answer. They refused to say they were present, because in their mind they weren't, you know, spiritually they weren't present. They were only there, you know, under duress. I mean, really by force. So they refused to answer the roll, but nevertheless they were declared present, so that the amendment could be ratified.
Talking about the Constitution, but they never talk about the limited aspect of it.
All right, let me read that clause to you. Again, this is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Now it starts out that says, Congress shall have power to, and it moves down to here, it says, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such a district not exceeding 10 miles square, as may by session of a particular state and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States. Let me stop there. That's about halfway through. Does anyone recognize what that 10-mile square is that they're talking about? Washington, D.C. Okay, so we said Congress shall have exclusive legislation. In other words, they have complete power over this district. We give them that 10-mile square for the seat of government. All right, now let's go on. And to exercise like authority over all places, now here's the kicker here, purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be. Okay, so in other words, now we're talking about a state here. So if they want land within a state, it says they have to do what? They have to purchase it, and they have to get the state legislature's consent. But it doesn't stop there. It says, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay? In other words, they can purchase land with the state legislature consent for those 5 reasons. No other. So then let me ask you, the Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, Forest Service, monuments, recreation areas, wildernesses, okay? Do any of these fit that bill? Does the federal government have constitutional right to own land within an estate except for what's written here? Okay. The only other place that it talks about land within, well, for the federal government is in Article 4, which talks about territories. The federal government does not own territories, but they have the right to control them until that they can be turned into states. Once a state enters the Union, it enters in upon equal footing with the original 13 states. That's also in Article 4. Did the original 13 states have federal land in them? They didn't, because the federal government didn't even exist when they started. They were an entity unto themselves. Each state, colonies if you would call them, but once they gained their independence from England, they were 13 separate countries. Now, evidence of this is in the treaty, the peace treaty that basically ended the Revolutionary War. It was signed by 14 states. The 13 states were obvious. Who was the 14th state? Does anyone know who the 14th state that signed the treaty that brought peace after the Revolutionary War? Anyone have an answer for that? It was the state of Great Britain. All right? So if you understand the definition of a state, look it up in your dictionaries, whatever. The definition of a state is the exact same as the definition of a nation. Okay? And the terms are often back and forth a little bit. So that treaty was signed by 14 states, and it lists them. I've actually seen it. I wish I had a copy of it to show you. But it was signed by the state of Great Britain. Okay? Now, we in America have almost been trained to believe that a state is nothing more than a district. In fact, that's what the BLM, they don't call it the state of Nevada, they call it the district of Nevada. I don't know if you realize that, but they don't recognize statehood. They call it a district. Or in Canada, they're called provinces. Okay? A province is not the same definition as a state. A state, I got stuck there earlier today too. A state is a much greater status and entity than a province or a district. Okay? And so technically, if you want to listen to or figure out what the United States is, okay, think of the word union. Is union a thing of one? Okay, can I be united with myself? Okay, no. But you guys are all here together united with me right now. Okay, so a union is a group of many. Okay, now we're one group, so I guess we're one under that deal, but without many, it can't be a union. Okay, so we are the United States. Okay, it's not one. We're not, quite honestly, and I'll probably get media backlash for this statement too. When I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't say one nation under God. I say 50 nations under God. United, or I say 50 nations united under God. Okay? We're still united. We're still one. I still love the United States of America, but I do recognize the individual entity of each state. Okay? The sovereignty is the key word there. That's right.
So does really the government, the BLM, has the real deed of this land, that it's the owner of this land?
No, I don't believe that. In fact, that's the crux of our message, is that the BLM does not own it. Now, they're claiming ownership because of the Enabling Act of Nevada. I could explain that to you. Want me to explain?
Yeah.
Every state that has entered the Union, except for the original 13 states. So even the states that came in that were further back east, the west of the Allegheny Mountains, and they were part of the Northwest Territories originally, and then the Louisiana Purchase became territories, and they became states. And then there was the Western lands, which came in after the Mexican-American War and through the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo. Okay, these were kind of the three major land acquisitions of the United States. Every state that entered the Union had what they called an Enabling Act. Part of the Enabling Act was to clear the title so that there wasn't any clouded title. Just like when you buy a house, you got to have title insurance that goes through a process to make sure there's no liens or etc. against it. The title, so when it becomes a state, there's nothing holding it back. Okay. In the Enabling Acts, and every single one of them are almost worded identically, it says that as a territory, and there's a key part there, okay, it doesn't say as a territory, but they are a territory at this point. A territory is different from a state. A territory is like an adolescent. What it does as an adolescent doesn't count when it becomes an adult. All right, so consider that in mind, that a territory is an adolescent. But in the Enabling Act, it says, we forever disclaim all title to this land. Okay? That forever is up when it becomes a state, because now it's left its adolescence, and now it's a different entity. It's no longer a territory, it's now a state. All right? But that's what they do, is they disclaim all the rights, all the land forever, so that they have clear title. Then once it becomes a state, according to Article 4, it enters in upon equal footing, and all the land belongs to the state, not the territory, the state. okay? And then the state then will go back and recognize all the private properties, go back and recognize all the rights, and you know, that's where our grazing rights and stuff come in and so forth, okay? In all the states up, you know, through the Northwest Territories and the Louisiana Purchase, everything was honored properly. I need to back up one more deal. The federal government never owned that land, okay? But when it becomes into the state, all the unappropriated lands, the federal government would act as a caretaker, but the word a trustee, okay, a trustee. Say like a child, parents die when he's young, he inherits a house, well, he's not 18, he's not an adult, that's put into a trustee. The trustee handles the estate until he becomes an adult, and then it's given to him, you know, according to the will or whatever the case might be. So in this case, the federal government acts as a trustee. They don't own the land, the trustee don't own the house, okay? The house belongs to the state or the people, like the land does, and the trustee had obligation to dispose of that land, okay? And that's where we see like the Homestead Act and different things like that going on. Okay, that's all kind of that part of that disposal, but they have no right to hold it. Okay, now in these western states, that disposal never took place. Okay, they still don't own it. They are illegally holding it in trust against the will of the true owners, which is us. Okay, so that's what's going on. Now the BLM claims they own it. Federal government claims they own it, and that's just not constitutionally correct.
Still a territory, what they're saying they own, right?
That's right. Okay, again, back to some of those laws. The federal government makes all the rules concerning a territory. That's in Article 4. Okay? In other words, a person that lives in a territory is not guaranteed his constitutional rights. He is not guaranteed the Bill of Rights. Now, they might allow him to, you know, have this right or that, but they're not. A person in a territory is not guaranteed the rights. Once it becomes a state, then they are. So you can see why they don't want to recognize us as a state, because they would have to recognize our grazing rights, because they are protected by state law. They would have to recognize your First Amendment rights. Remember what they did up there? They put your First Amendment areas up there. Why do you think they think you can get away with that? Because if it's treated like a territory, you don't have that right. Okay, when they arrested my brother down here on the road, okay, he was off the white line, and he was just like you guys are, just like this guy. He had his cell phone in one hand, and he had his iPad in the other, and he's videoing. Okay, I was right next to him, not further than he was away. I had 4 snipers with their, and I looked at them binoculars, looked right down their scopes, right down their barrels. And they had 20 other agents come. And this is all he's doing. And they jump him and tear him to the ground and drive his face into the gravel with their knees. And why? Because they said they told us, you have no right except you be in those protest areas. That was their words. Under territorial law, you have no rights until we become a state. So this is why our message to our governor is. Now I'll tell you about my other brother. He made a phone call to the Nevada State Governor's office. Now he didn't speak with the governor, so I'll catch him a little break right there. But he spoke with the gal in the office there. And the gal says, the governor doesn't have any authority in the state of Nevada. He's like, let me clean out my ear. He goes, I want to make sure I heard that right. So you're telling me that he's the governor of the state of Nevada, and he has no authority over the control of the state of Nevada? And she's like, that's correct. He's like, I need to clean out my other ear. That just doesn't sound right. So he's like, all right, Nevada has a boundary, has a shape. Everything within that state is Nevada's, right? And he is the governor, correct? He is the governor. But you're saying he has no authority within the state. She goes, that's correct. He has no authority within the state. Okay? Why would that be? The only way that would be is because it's still being treated as a territory. Now, in 1864, on October 31st, what happened? President Lincoln declared Nevada a state, did he not? I've read the speech. He declared it a state. If he declared it a state, and if it's truly a state, then it had to enter upon equal footing with the original 13 states, which means all of this land belongs to the state and her people, which means the Enabling Act, that forever, ended at that point. This is our battle. We believe that Nevada is a state. We believe that this land belongs to the people and is to be controlled by the people closest to the government closest to the people, which is the county. And we believe that our rights are protected by state law, and we have not broken any laws here on this ranch. And we're in complete compliance with the Constitution and supreme law of the land.
Yeah! Article 4, the United States shall maintain for the states a republican form of government.
That is right. That is part of the guarantee. Okay? A lot of us have been taught that we live in a democracy. Okay? What does the Pledge of Allegiance say? And to this republic for which we stand. Okay? You will not find where it speaks about a democracy anywhere in our founding documents. Okay? A democracy is mob rule. Rule of men. A republic is based upon principles. Principles. And the principles of freedom and liberty are espoused in this Constitution. And a republican form of government is supposed to protect those principles.